Televised wrestling programs of all types have come and gone through the years, from traditional shows that focus primarily on the in-ring product to unique ideas that attempt to think more outside of the box. In its lifespan, WWE, particularly under Vincent Kennedy McMahon, has experimented with different ideas that challenge even their own established confines of what a wrestling program is supposed to look like. Some have succeeded, while others are swiftly relegated to the bottom of the wastebasket. The vehicle in this video, in its prime form, was about as short-lived as it gets. And yet, some of the unique elements within came to define WWE's forthcoming and necessary evolution. I'm Jack from Cultaholic.com, and this is Remembering Shotgun Saturday Night. The homogenized, mother-approved WWE of 1996, apart from the starkly defiant Steve Austin, was about as cool as your aunt's sewing circle. While WWE had mostly presented itself as a family-friendly product, through its simplistic heroes and villains tropes for many years, things got a little too squeaky clean in the mid-90s, something the lapsing fans obviously noticed. The good guys had no edge, while most of the bad guys were toothless caricatures. Kids who grew up on Hulkamania and Macho Madness were now too old for this kind of tedium, and the ensuing generation didn't take to WWE's product with the same enthusiasm as when rock and wrestling was getting that sweet MTV rub. Really, there was just nothing contemporary about Vince's circus. In the latter stages of 96, WWE entered into a co-op with a product most unlike its long-standing traditions: Paul Heyman's ECW. The line-walking New York product did have its share of chaotic moments, but nothing like the routine table-breaking, blood-spilling carnage that played to bingo halls and rec centers in the Northeast. As ECW's popularity grew beyond its cult fringes, WWE fans were becoming more aware of its existence. And when those fans compared the two products, well, it should come as no surprise that one took second place in the coolness stakes. In an America that feasted on alternative rock, gangster rap, trashy talk shows, and violent action movies, ECW was much closer to the pulse than the colour inside the lines WWE. And McMahon wanted to badly appeal to this modern taste. With that goal in mind, McMahon commissioned a weekly television series that he believed would mirror the sort of gritty danger that ECW served on the regular, Shotgun Saturday Night. Set to debut in syndication in late-night time slots on the first Saturday of 1997, Shotgun was WWE's first conscious attempt at creating a show that was not at all aimed towards children. The wrestling fans who had moved on to products that catered to their maturing tastes were the target, as were any channel surfers looking to set the remote down upon finding something that fed into their appetite for colourful anarchy. The shows would not take place from the usual larger venues that WWE set up shop in, but rather something more akin to the holes in the wall that were part of ECW's distinct flavour. According to Bruce Pritchard, Vince wanted to run the card in dimly lit New York City hotspots, but neither he, Pritchard, nor production head Kevin Dunn knew the first thing about the wild Big Apple nightlife. That's where the ECW connection came in handy again, as in late 1996, the trio enlisted Paul Heyman to show them different venues around town that fit what Vince was looking for. Appropriately for the time, it was ECW showing WWE where the pulse was located. The inaugural episode of Shotgun emanated from New York City's Mirage nightclub in front of less than 200 hooting onlookers. Vince and the ever-popular Sonny were on the call for a WWE broadcast unlike any that preceded it, bearing a grimy, underground feel that portrayed the glossiness of the Titan sports everyone was used to. The yellow ropes and smaller ring also helped it to feel different. If matching the visual element of ECW only with WWE's advanced level of production was the only goal, then WWE certainly aced the course. But that's where the comparisons ended, as while WWE did expertly alter the visual element in an attempt to create something different, the comparisons to ECW ended there. The program was filled with attempts at edgy humour, the majority of which were smudged with McMahon's fingerprints. The headbangers wrestled on the show as the blasphemous flying nuns, one of whom was dubbed Mother Smucker. In another bit, Jim Cornette was stripped down to his underwear by mini wrestlers Masquerita Sagrada Jr. and Mini Vader. According to Cornette, McMahon came up with an idea where the outspoken manager would have to lift up Mini Vader in order for him to use a urinal, since he'd be too short to do so otherwise. This idea was jettisoned once it was realised that the urinals extended far enough for even a pint-sized wrestler to comfortably use. Contrasting with that type of slide whistle humour were more risque elements. This was more in tune with the WWE intent on radical change. Rather flexible dancers added allure to the show, as did Goldust's manager Marlena. Bob Backlund took exception to Marlena's provocative manner of dress, so the valet provided a distraction during Goldust's match with the Sultan by lowering her top and baring her chest. While she did strategically conceal the elements that may have got them kicked out of the venue, and the home audience didn't know that, the point was still clear. You weren't going to be seeing Marlena do this on a standard episode of Monday Night Raw. Along with some more violent elements like Ahmed Johnson powerbombing D'Lo Brown on a car hood, Shotgun was definitely something off the beaten path. But the show had other problems aside from its initial identity crisis, one glaring one being inconvenience. In order to film the episodes, wrestlers were plucked from wherever they were on the touring loop and flown to the location, all for a fairly low payoff. Given how costly a Saturday night in New York City can be, not to mention the undesirable traffic and the potentially tiring travel for the wrestlers, it didn't seem worth it all just to fulfill the vision of a wrestling show that struggled to find solid footing. Cornette added that even just organizing the show proved chaotic, as there was so much to coordinate, and it wasn't like there were 20,000 ticket-buying spectators either. The second episode of the show came from New York's All-Star Cafe, and there, the insanity only ratcheted up further. Sunny, envious of Marlena's exhibitionism the previous week, produced a sex tape starring herself. It sounds pretty risque until you learn that the tape was her getting freaky with someone in an Elmo costume, which tickled pretty much nobody except, maybe Vince McMahon maybe found it funny. He maybe did. Additionally, the Flying Nuns were arrested for solicitation, and Vince McMahon announced that Goldust was somehow pregnant and would give birth on next week's show. The angle was scrapped in less than a week's time because really, what on earth could the payoff possibly have been? Well, a novelty rubber hand, I guess. The third episode of the program proved a little bit more saucy thanks to an appearance from certified living legend Terry Funk. It was the weekend of the '97 Royal Rumble in San Antonio, and for the sake of just making more logistical sense, Shotgun was filmed in San Antonio at a club called Denim and Diamonds. Funk was not under contract with WWE at the time, but was brought in to help fill out the numbers for the Rumble match. Amid the usual hack comedy like a Macarena song parody and the Honky Tonk Man cheating in a card game, Funk's presence added the sort of hardened grit that seemed to be more like what Vince was looking for. But Funk's appearance also proved controversial. While he did brawl frenetically with fellow Texan Steve Austin as part of a show-closing melee that featured multiple wrestlers, his choice of words caused an issue. During an interview on the show, he called correspondent Todd Pettingill's mother a whore and referred to Vince as a Yankee bastard. The word asshole also came out of his mouth, though really, a barroom brawler like Funk saying these things in a Texas watering hole shouldn't really have been too shocking. Nonetheless, one of the New York syndicates that aired the show didn't take kindly to Funk's salty language. Shotgun was moved back to a later time slot, which understandably upset McMahon far more than any insult could. 1 week later, Shotgun returned to the Empire State, beaming out of New York City's Webster Hall. This episode proved much different than its predecessors when it scaled back the attempted comedy almost entirely. Instead of serving up a distorted ECW meets SNL Freakazoid program, the hour-long telecast was much more traditional wrestling-wise, featuring matches such as Bret Hart vs. Mankind, Crush vs. Psycho Sid, and Savio Vega vs. Rocky Maivia. It was during the latter match that Vega cemented a heel turn, joining the Nation of Domination. So at least, the show seemed to be in sync with the ongoing WWE canon, as opposed to some disconnected abstraction. The following week, back at New York's Mirage nightclub, the silly and the serious were back to fighting for balance as Mankind and Vader pummeled tag team rival Davey Boy Smith at the same time as the Headbangers, free of their nunnery attire now, made a splash after Mosh puked all over Thrasher. You see what we mean about the serious and the silly battling for attention. The Metalheads battled the Godwins in the show's main event, and ironically, it seemed like Henry and Phineas were the darlings of the show. Vince has always had an infatuation with overalls-wearing country boys, it seems, but apparently he truly loved the fish-out-of-water spectacle of mixing Ozark hillbillies with the neon seediness of New York after dark. Again, the contrast felt a little bit excessive and not as funny as was probably intended. Perhaps the most famous image from Shotgun's history graced the airwaves a week later when The Undertaker wrestled future three-time WrestleMania opponent Hunter Hearst Helmsley at New York's Penn Station. After going to a non-finish, Undertaker chased the pre-game to an upstairs area and proceeded to tombstone him onto an escalator, a spot made even cooler by an unconscious Helmsley riding the moving stairs all the way to the bottom. That was certainly an inspired bit of goodness that demonstrated what can happen when showrunners and creative types are forced to think outside of the box. With this sort of direction, the very idea of Shotgun had potential to continue altering WWE's stagnant DNA towards something altogether more evolutionary. The February 15th episode aired the weekend of that month's In Your House pay-per-view, which took place in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Instead of hitting up some accommodating night spot in the area to film that week's episode, WWE ran a best-of in its place, looking back at the barely reigned madness of the previous 6 episodes. And that's because WWE decided to scrap the concept of Shotgun altogether. The Penn Station card, apart from the escalator spot, was a largely boring affair, and the format wasn't amounting to whatever Vince's true vision for the show really was. Coupled with the filming logistics that hardly seemed worth the trouble by this point, and McMahon moved on from what was essentially ECW light. The night after the Chattanooga pay-per-view, WWE taped Shotgun the same night as Raw. Cornette took Sonny's spot on commentary, and what was booked was your basic B show, complete with Crush taking on Davey Boy Smith, the debut of the new Blackjacks, and Goldust defeating TL Hopper, only without the cheesy vignettes and the manufactured attempts at neon-lit erotica. All had kinda changed, and this became the new normal for Shotgun, a secondary show that supplemented the Monday Night Raw flagship with nothing to really differentiate itself as a viable entity. WWE has produced decades worth of by-the-book weekend shows that don't give away marquee matches, and sadly Shotgun had joined that parade. The Shotgun name endured for 2.5 years, formally coming to an end the weekend of the 1999 SummerSlam. In many markets, Shotgun aired in more traditional time slots, such as weekend afternoons, and the Saturday night part of the name was obviously chopped off. And in some places, the name of the show was just changed altogether. For example, for a brief period in '98, the show was called WWF New York and featured the unlikely commentary duo of Jim Ross and Vince Russo. When Shotgun faded, WWE Metal replaced it, following the same routine of mid-card and underneath wrestlers competing in pretty barely acknowledged matches. All the while, the dubbed commentary spent more time referencing storylines from the A shows. At the time of Shotgun's demise in '99, it seemed like forever and a day that the original concept of the program was trying to co-opt some of the thriving ECW mojo, trying to make WWE a more hip and edgy product to adolescents and young adults. Shotgun's death coincided with the birth of SmackDown as a weekly series, a time in which WWE was enjoying record business and dizzying popularity, all thanks to, well, a product that made WWE more hip and edgy to adolescents and young adults. That's right, Shotgun predated the Attitude Era, and while it wasn't perfect by any means, it wasn't really the worst first step in that direction. If Shotgun Saturday Night is a failure, then it's a notable failure. Vince McMahon may not have known how to assemble a replica ECW, even if you gave him some kind of IKEA instruction guide, but by the end of '96, he was at least beginning to realise the winds of change in the general wrestling audience. Shotgun was Vince's first earnest attempt to create a show that pushed away all prior WWE conventions, embracing the palette of the modern world. And while admittedly it wasn't that good, at least he was willing to change. The Attitude Era may have been the double platinum album, but Shotgun Saturday Night was the well-intentioned, if half-baked mixtape that contained some of those familiar riffs and beloved hooks. Thanks very much for watching, and let us know what you think in the comments section down below. You can follow Cultaholic on Twitter at Cultaholic and on Facebook at facebook.com/Cultaholic. If you enjoy what we do, then please do check out our Patreon, patreon.com/Cultaholic, where you can pledge. And don't forget, of course, most importantly of all, to hit subscribe and to join us.